Welcome to an episode of the Tower 26B Racer Podcast. I'm Jim Levinsky here once again with Coach Jerry Rodriguez. Jerry, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good. A whole lot of
I did it again. I have multiple things open here. I have too much open, Jerry.
Why did you do this?
I do it. Technology, man. Technology. Sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead. We're on Facebook Live. Before I let you go on, and you yell at me, we're on Facebook Live. Emily's taking questions. Emily's back on with us, but go ahead, Jerry.
No, usually you ask how I'm doing and always, same thing. Fine. Everything's good. Cause that's sort of my life. But believe it or not, in the last couple of weeks, so since the last podcast, I have actually started using some new tools and me and gadgets, right? It's not my thing. On Bobby McGee's here. I know you'll introduce Bobby in a minute, but us older guys, we tend to get, there's old traditional side where I tend to sort of, put the gadgets aside for a certain extent, but I've been using these new goggles. They're not new. They've been around for a couple of years, but I've gotten into them. These form goggles. I don't know where I put mine, but I had it here somewhere. Anyway, those things are unreal. We're not getting paid. We don't do ads for any of this stuff. It is incredible. Has me completely engaged. And I now want to go to a workout to swim more than I ever wanted to. I want to see my real-time metrics. I want to see my distance per stroke. I want to see my real-time heart rate, which is not accurate on your polar on your wrist, as opposed to when you have your heart rate coming off of your temple. I mean, all the metrics are there, and it's like, okay, you screwed up in that 100 because you're shortened up your stroke too much. Whatever it is, it has me 100% engaged. So I'm back reinvigorated to swim fast again.
Listen to the fire in this guy's voice, Emily. It's a funny thing. We had Dan, the CEO of Form, on this podcast like 2 years ago, and I think you just tuned it out. I don't want technology. No,
so I used it. I used it in open water, and then we had some issues. But anyway, point is, I'm sold, 100% sold.
Awesome. Well, that was episode 81. If you want to listen to anything else on Form goggles, Emily's back in virtual studio. We had her on assignment over doing homework in Finland on the Half Ironman World Championship course. She was there for 2 months. She's back. Emily, it's great to have you.
Yeah, it's good to be back. Yeah,
it
was not in Finland for 2 months. I was just there for a week, but it felt like a long time. You haven't been on this damn podcast in 2 months.
Yeah. So it's good to have you back. Let's hear those buttery tones a little more often here, and pipe up, because we have the world famous, world renowned running coach on with us, Bobby McGee, endurance sport coach, running coach. This guy's been everywhere. He's coached. I'll get into your introduction in a second. Bobby, it's a pleasure to have you on. It's an honor to have you on. And actually, I'm kind of nervous. So,
really nervous? No,
nervous. I don't get nervous for anybody. Come on.
I've just had one of my athletes say to me, she's bummed that she didn't know soon enough that I was on this podcast. So no need to be nervous. I'm dropping the ball left, right, and center at my age anyway. So no worries. I'm really excited to be with you guys and looking forward to the time we have together.
Well, it's an honor to have you on. It's funny because under my desk here, I have 2 books, and I have one, obviously, Triathlon Swimming, the Tower 26 Method, right? So that's my one book, Coach Jerry, the author, and Emma Kate, right? Tower. And my other book right here just happens to be Run Workouts for Runners and Triathletes by the one and only Bobby McGee. Now, Rodriguez, I have a bone to pick with you before we get into the meat of this. I know this is mainly an audio podcast, but do we have viewers right now? And I don't know if you can see this. Can you see that little black box right there? What does that say? Emily, maybe your eyes are better than Rodriguez's.
I got good eyes, but it's not.
I have Bobby's book. Bobby's book says sweat-proof pages, and it's a running book.
Nice.
I have a swimming book here. No sweat, no waterproof pages. Bobby, can you teach Jerry something about publishing a book for swimming with waterproof pages?
Now, we've just had this conversation about technology, right? And to Jerry, technology is writing out with a good old ballpoint pen, soaking it in water, and then sticking it up on the tiles. That's technology there. Yeah. So it hadn't occurred that the book should be with waterproof pages, right?
Well, I'm glad all these minds could come together and maybe we can come up with a swimming book with waterproof pages for the next edition, huh, Jerry?
Well, yes. I want to tell you, Bob, it's such a pleasure and honor to have you. I wanted to start off with a couple of questions on you, for you, because I'm curious, and I've never asked you this, being with you in all the chats we've had. When did you start running? You know, what events did you run? What's your sort of athletic background?
You know, I don't get those questions often, right? Because I pretty much decided at age 17 that I was going to be a coach. You know, I was just completing high school, and my dad said, you know, what are you going to study? And I said, you know, everything looks pretty dry to me. I think I want to study sport. And he said, well, you know, you want to be a professional athlete. What are you going to do? I said, I'm never going to be good enough to be a professional athlete. I'm going to be a coach, right? And in South Africa in those days, all that was available was teaching phys ed, right? So I studied a phys ed degree, so that's where it started. But the sport that I actually achieved the highest level of performance in was field hockey. I played in the minors in South Africa in field hockey. I was a goalkeeper, and I made it up to nationals, and I was probably at one stage like the number 4 goalkeeper in the country, number 4 or 5, somewhere in there. But that was a long time ago, so I did always run. I ran cross country at school. I ran track at school. We used to have, growing up in a Jesuit school, when it was too wet to play field hockey, to play rugby, to play cricket, we used to do something called Hares and Hounds, where you tear up a whole bunch of pieces of newspaper and stick them in musette bags, and the best runners in the school would get a 5-minute head start, and then the school would chase you, right? And if they caught you, they tied you up with your shoelaces and your socks and left you there till the end of the 6-hour game, right? And you just used to run anywhere you liked. And all of this was in the bush, right? So at the side of a pond, in the bushes, through the trails. If they catch you, you're a dead man. So you just make sure you never get caught. So that was my introduction to running. Loved it from the start. You know, I ran sub 2 for 800. I was about a 430 miler. And so, you know, I was okay. And then I made my
Well, that's quite fast for back in the, I mean, you're talking about running in the 60s and 70s, right?
70s and 80s for me.
Yep.
Yep. And, you know, I did my long course races. I started triathlon, I think, in 86, the bug bit, and my hero was actually Scott Tinley, because I loved the way he wrote. Obviously, we only had access to writing, right? So Scott used to write that incredible back page article in Triathlete magazine that I just loved so much, and he was, of course, a great runner in the sport. So so 86 is when I came to triathlon, because I was so tired of coaching runners and then trying to run afterwards and being so disengaged, having been involved with runners all day. I thought, okay, I'm going to find a sport that nobody wants me to coach in. And that didn't last long, right? And then I started coaching in triathlon. So now I play golf.
Well, you got lots of fairways in Colorado, that's for sure.
That's true.
Well, just a little background before we really get into it. You've, like you said, you've been involved for over 30 years in the coaching. You're a 5-time Olympic coach. It's pretty impressive, very impressive. 9 Olympic medalists. You spent many years coaching elite athletes, individual amateurs of all levels, and guiding them to achieve their goals. So let's just say you've been around the block. So a lot of information in that brain. I don't know if we're gonna get to all of it today, but let's get as much as we can. Jer, how do we start to pick it out of there?
Well, I Bobby, his experience is so wide, the plethora and breadth of knowledge is incredible. So I thought we'd sort of cast a wide net and then maybe get into a few specific things. Having been coaching triathletes now, Bobby, in 1985. So this is your 39th year, I guess, if I do that math right, into the 39th year of doing it. So you've coached obviously very, very elite athletes, but you also coach beginners and intermediate level. What is sort of the key issue that you see when someone gets into the sport of triathlon regarding running that's a problem?
Yeah, I think an important distinction to make from the start is the difference between long course and short course, right? Especially draft legal short course, which not a lot of people know, right? Which is predicated on the run. You do everything you can to get into position after T2 to be able to run, and you win the race on the run, right?
And that's sort of your bailiwick also, right? I mean, you coach a lot of athletes at the Olympic level.
That's correct.
Right.
That is my bailiwick. So when the then high performance director of USA Triathlon, Libby Burrell, was in the era, this is 2002, in the era where every US Olympian in 2000 had come from a Division 1 swimming program, right? And USA Triathlon and generally in the world, they were looking for swimmers, and then they teach them how to bike, and they all became very strong bikers, right? And then they had to teach them this defensive run, right? And that went on for many Olympic Games until we figured out, all right, our first medalist turned out to be a runner who used to swim, and then the same with our mixed relay team that won the silver medal. Those were runners, right, that used to swim somewhere in their background. So we changed that model around. But in long course racing, it really is pretty much all about the bike. That's the amount of time you spend on the course that predicates that, right? 112 miles versus a 2.4 mile swim versus a 26-mile run. You're going to spend most of your time on the bike. Although in 2008, when I was in Kona, I heard an incredible stat. And the stat was that people had spent on average more time on the run course than on the bike course that year. Just because they were falling apart so badly in the run, which was really interesting. And a lot of running coaches at my point in time in 2002 came into the sport. They were using a running model saying, okay, I want this person to run 10 to 13 times a week. I want them thinking about the mileages they had before. I know that the times that they can run off the bike, et cetera, et cetera.
And this is for high performance athletes we're talking about, more elite athletes. Okay, okay. Because I want to get, once you go through that, I want to come into the sort of the beginning athletes also. So let's identify this is for our tip of the spear athletes.
Yeah, so if you take the beginner athlete then, and they're coming to long course racing, so 100K, 70.3, Ironman distance, you would hear people talking like, on this particular course, I'm going to swim this kind of time. They'd have a very good idea of what they were capable of in the water. Similarly, with the onset of power meters, they'd have a really good idea of the kind of power they could put out for that duration of time, right? So they were pretty accurate in being able to predict that. But 90% of people weren't coming anywhere within 20% of what the time was they thought they could run, right? And so running was always something on the back burner. I'll just take a little run every day. I'll run when I can, but I'm going to work on the bike and I'm going to work on the swim, right? And when I started getting involved with people, I realized that people with big engines, even if they're age group athletes and so on, their escalation rate, their rate of improvement on the bike is quite phenomenal. They get better, and when you get good at something, you enjoy that and you want to get out more. So the people used to bike more and more and more, suck at the run as little as possible, right? And the run just became the red-headed stepchild, right? And I figured out, you've got a big engine, you got good form in the water, you're going to do well on the bike, right? But a big engine did not equate to good running times, because well over 50% of what you need on the run is peripheral. You need to be able to stay on your legs. You need to have the muscle endurance to put out the running pace that your heart is really comfortable doing. People start realizing, okay, I run 5K, my heart rate's 180. When I run Ironman marathon off the bike, my heart rate's barely 110. Obviously, my heart is not under pressure, right? It's my lower limb that's under pressure. And so taking on the approach of going, you don't need to think aerobic conditioning for the beginner when it comes to long course racing. You need to think of muscular endurance. You need to think of platform stability. You need to think of muscles, ligaments, and tendons that have to be able to function after hours and hours of work, 8, 9 hours of work, then they need to be functioning for 4 or 5 hours. And, that started bringing in the whole idea is that it's way better to do your zone 1 and zone 2 stuff, hiking, walking, going at these low intensities, strengthening your legs, strengthening your hips, your glutes, your knee support muscles, your arch, your ankles. And that's where I started with this, whole approach that if you want to have an enjoyable experience in Ironman, you have to be able to stay on your pins for that amount of time. And that's the conditioning background.
Yeah, I know I use it with my athletes every day. I write the word resiliency. Like, you got to keep building that resiliency. And that just comes with exactly what you're saying, like not overdoing it one workout over another, but consistently building that leg resiliency to absorb the stress of a marathon. Because like you said, if you don't have that resiliency, you can only go so far. You're going to be walking that back half.
Well, it's also going to lead to more injuries, right?
Of course, if they fall apart mechanically, then they start relying on ligaments, and then eventually they start relying on bone, right? That tibia starts to bow, they can't cushion themselves with their feet and so on, and then they start getting these stress reactions, hips, knees, ankles, feet, and things start to give way. It's fascinating that we didn't follow in triathlon for the longest time. We didn't follow the law of specificity. If people had done 3 Ironman races or 5 70.3 races and they went and did an analysis, okay, how much did I actually run of this half marathon? Oh my goodness, I only ran for 45 minutes. All the rest of it was walking. But I didn't prepare 1 iota of walking to get ready to do this race. So there was no specificity. So if people reverse engineered how they were actually racing, they would have come to the answer sooner. I am just not strong enough to be able to stay on my legs, no matter what kind of power my heart would like me to put out. I just don't have the wheels, the suspension, the transmission, the wheel alignment to be able to do that.
But besides keeping it in like zone 1, zone 2, and going on hikes, what other kind of things do you prescribe for your athletes to help build that ability to withstand the stress?
Very, very specific. That's why we came up with Run Form. Very, very specific, customized strength and conditioning for that individual. What are you doing in your gait? Why are you doing it? Let's address that. Let's get you strong. Let's get you the optimum ability to do that. Let's teach you the skill to be able to do that, right? Again, the community, the affluent community that is so fond of triathlon, right? Most of them grew up with their understanding of sport being basketball, baseball, football, softball, those kind of sports that are explosive. And the running style in those sports is high-speed intermittent, right? And the only sport of those sports that they would understand that would really help them in triathlon would be soccer. Because soccer is an endurance event with high speed, high VO2 kinetics, right? So I highly recommend looking at their gait, looking at what their limiters are. There's some normative data out there, but you got to know your own normative data. If you've got a ground contact time of in excess of 300 milliseconds, you are a sticky runner. You are using way too much strength and way too little elastic return, right? What can I do to increase my leg spring stiffness? All right. When I'm running at race pace in a half Ironman, my stride length is not even a meter. Why is that? Is that a range of motion problem, or is that a power strength problem? Address those very specifics. And it's absolutely amazing when you see people, they reduce their time commitment to running, they up their specificity commitment, and the performances start to show up.
So let's give some specifics, real life specifics. Let's move away from the high performance athlete and get to Joe and Jenny, civilian that have families and careers and so on. And he and her have 10 hours a week to train, and they want to do 2 events, an Olympic distance and a half Ironman. So let's start with the half Ironman. It's become one of the more popular events, almost a couple hundred of those races now available worldwide. And they have 10 hours a week of training, and they have no sport background in the sense of they weren't swimmers, they weren't runners, they weren't cyclists. They were sort of generalists in school, maybe played some baseball, maybe played some volleyball, maybe whatever it may have been, but they weren't indigenous to our three sports. How do you dose out a training regime on the running segment, getting that person ready, and they're new to the sport, so they don't have a background, they're new to the sport, and they say, hey, I want to do a half Ironman. That's what I would like to start with, and that is 9 months down the line. Give us sort of how would you build that out on the running side?
On the running side, the first thing would be to look not at the demands of competition, but at the individual's requirement, right? So you look at the very, very basic physics of running, right? On a bike, you've got 5 contact points, and with the right pressure, tire pressure, and so on a flat road, it's an incredibly easy activity, right? Just to do, right? Similarly, in the swim, you have the buoyancy, so you're not going to be involved with any kind of impact. So the first thing in the run is you look at that runner's background and you look at their mass, all right? And you go, okay, bigger boned individuals, bigger individuals, they are going to have to spend more time paying attention to ligament conditioning and bone density, right? That's their primary objective, right? So we know that getting in the gym, doing work is going to help their bone density. And we also know that walking is going to help their bone density. And that if they are beginners, the likelihood that they are able to train to start with is very slim. They're just going to get into the same kind of trouble that people come from a swimmer's background, low bone density, sedentary lifestyles. That's the first thing that they need to pay attention to. So moving away from the need to be out of breath, because that is already too hard for your skeletal structure. All right. So mouth closed, breathing through your nose activity, build the duration. You know, so basically every second or every third day, going out and being on your legs, all right? And then that might be a 6-week process of walking 3 to 5 times a week, growing that duration, getting to a point where you can go, okay, I can walk for 45 minutes 4 times a week. That's a pretty good level. I'm not breaking down anything. Now I can start thinking about running. But then the running must be stupid low load, 1 on, 1 off, run a minute, walk a minute for 10 minutes. That's basically your starting point when you're a beginner. All right, especially for the bigger individuals. You know, I love the analogy where a husband and wife take on the sport of triathlon together. The husband rocks in the sprint. He's very good in the Olympic distance. His wife's starting to get really close to him in the 70.3, in fact, beating him sometimes. And then she beats him by 2.5, 3 hours in an Ironman. All right. Just because of the size of the two individuals. You know, the bigger male, bigger radiator struggles with the heat. That's a big thing worldwide in 70.3 and Ironman, is also that ability to deal with extreme conditions. It doesn't matter how early in the morning you start. By the time you start running, it's a seriously environmentally impeded run. So those two things, not getting injured, going as slow as what it takes to be consistent, all right, and then starting to expose yourself to the climactic conditions that you're going to expect on race day.
Now, especially in this sport, you find a lot of egos are out of control, right? I just want to run fast all the time. This might not necessarily be that new runner, but newer to maybe longer distance events. And we have a trouble putting the restrictor plate on those athletes who, oh God, that's too slow. I can't go out that slow. How do you get across to them how important it is to run at that low end pace in order to end up where they want to be in 6-8 months?
I don't know how Jerry learned to swim, but how I learned to swim was you get chucked in the deep end and you find your way to the side, and then you get chucked in again and you find your way to the side. Sometimes people just need to do that first triathlon to have a wake-up call and go, oh yeah, I think I should listen to my coach who's not more experienced, right? But basically, and again, that analysis of the likelihood of how they're going to go out there in their first race, and you prepare a horse as the horse is found for the course that they're going to run in, right? So there's one caveat there, right? In running, there is an intensity that is mechanically too slow, right? You go out there and your heart rate indicates that you should be running 15-minute miles, right? But walking 15-minute miles is actually quite a lot easier than running 15-minute miles, because your ground contact time is so low. You're putting so much stress on your tendons, your ligaments, and your bone structure. So there is a minimum pace. And what you do with individuals like that who can't run slowly enough for the cardiovascular load is you help them. You put them on a treadmill. You make sure the environment is cool enough, right? So that they can go slightly faster, but keep those physiological parameters under control. So that's what I would view. But generally speaking, I mean, I learned this from coaching ultra marathoners. If you're going up a hill and you've got the mindset that I will not stop running and people keep walking past you, stop being a damn fool about it and walk.
Very, very well said. So let's go through that beginner now that's gone through those first 6 weeks, and you took them along from walking, and then now you're doing these intermittent 1 minute on, 1 minute offs. They've built enough confidence, enough resilience, enough strength, ligaments and so on are in place. Now we're into, say, they're into their and the example I gave was sort of 9 months. Now you're into the second 3-month cycle. So let's break this into 3-month cycles. We've gone through the first 3. You've laid this very, very careful foundation. Now you're into the second 3-month cycle, and I'm using that word cycle just as an example for simplicity purposes in this discussion. So you now have this this middle third, and they have 10 hours a week. How do you dose out that middle third? What does that look like? And I know that's a very broad question, but
yes, it is. It is. But this 10 hours a week is 10 hours for everything, right? Swim, bike,
correct. Run. Yes.
Okay.
I'm trying to make this realistic for the majority.
It makes complete sense. So they've got this 10 hours a week, right? And we've now removed the fact that they are the limiter. Now their limiter becomes their time availability. And the golden rule of the beginner in long course racing is, when in doubt, ride your bike. Okay, so that's you've got to get time in the saddle. So a large part of their time is going to go to the bike. Luckily, the run is limited, right? So if somebody's, even a very high-end athlete can get pretty far on 6 hours of running a week. So if you can get this individual to be running 2.5, 3 hours a week, that's pretty damn good. Right now, the swim might take a little bit more time because it's constrained not by the swimming time, but what it takes to get there, set up, get the swim done, get out of there, right? That's just a little bit more limiting. But you basically work on that kind of a model. And then you look that this whole sport is all aerobic, right? Sure, there's a lot of technique in the pool, all right, but it's all aerobic, and strength and power is not for performance with this community. Strength and power for this part of the community is about health and about resilience. So you building their strength and power around being able to stay on their legs for that long, right? So there's no threshold training. There's no tempo training. And you would only do tempo training if tempo represented the effort that we're going to be able to put out off the bike. And you have to be pretty damn good athlete to be able to do tempo off the bike.
So let's hold for a second. Let's put a pin in that explanation of those 3 months. Okay. On this segues perfectly into what is tempo training. What are the indigenous words that running coaches use to describe efforts? And I just heard tempo being one of them. Could you tell us what the descriptors are, and then a little bit about each descriptor?
Yeah. So it's both an old conversation and a very new conversation, right? So if you use the word zone, right? And I don't like the word zone that much, because there really is only one zone. And to me, that zone is tempo, right? So let's say zone 1 is low aerobic, and zone 2 is endurance aerobic, right? So it's an aerobic effort that you can continue for an infinite amount of time if your temperature control and your feeding and your hydration are in order, right? So that would be aerobic. Still being able to hold a conversation, maybe not sing the whole of Bobby McGee in one breath, right? But still being able to chat and so on, which is what most people will be doing when they run off the bike, right? Tempo in my world, all right, can be described, I'm talking about threshold being somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes of intense work, of the most intense work you can do.
So you just threw in another word, threshold.
Yeah.
So
okay. All right. So we'll talk about threshold after that, but tempo is about 85% of that. But the easiest way to describe what tempo is, and tempo is different for track runners, is somewhere between the top of zone 2 and where threshold starts. Anywhere in there is tempo.
So hold. What is zone 2?
Okay. So zone 2, just anecdotally, and Siler's work and so on, is anything probably up to about 70% of your maximum heart rate. But normally for most people, it's 65, 60, 65. So I kind of go zone 1, 60 to 65% of your maximum heart rate. I like to use heart rate reserve. It makes more sense. And heart rate reserve just means using your resting heart rate as an evening factor. So it would be max minus resting times 0.65 plus resting would represent sort of roughly your top of your zone 1. And then your zone 2 would be about 5% above that.
Could you repeat that again? Because that for the math challenge folks.
All right.
Max heart rate.
Yep. Max heart rate minus your resting heart rate multiplied by the intensity factor, which is 0.6 or 0.65 or 0.7, which is where zone 1 and zone 2 live. All right. And then you add on your resting heart rate on the end of that again.
Okay.
Okay, that gives you roughly that idea. And then you can equate that to power. If you use power in running, which in long course racing is very, very useful, right? You can now associate power with that same intensity.
So you said zone 2, or the way you define zone 2, 65% up to what's the
Probably
upper limit?
to 70% of your heart rate reserve. And zone 1, 60 to 65. Somewhere in there.
We're going to have a lovely conversation. We're going to want you back on because we're having a physiologist on that we're going to talk about these zones, because I think that there's a lot of clarification that needs to be done. But in running terms, because I want our listeners to let me back up. Here's what happens with many athletes coming into the sport. We have the running coaches with their terminology for efforts, and you just named threshold. I just heard tempo. I heard zone 1 on zone 2. So you just threw out 3 different things. And then if you talk to the bike coach, now we have percentage of FTP. We have this percentage over it, this percentage under it. We have threshold also. So we've thrown in other indigenous words, and then you have the swim coach, and that person can deliver all types of things, from a color system to they have 3 of the EV system. They've got all different types of words that they use. So
the RPE system is so complex as well, especially when you start talking about calibration of RPE, right? And there are 3 very distinct ways of looking at that, right? I like Macmillan's way myself, but there's Jack Daniels's VDOT ways to try and determine that as well. You can use the IAAF tables if you want. So there's various ways that you can look at these things.
But let's simplify this for listeners. When the running coach, as yourself, is giving effort programming, you're using words such as, I heard threshold, I heard tempo, and then I heard this zone 1 and zone 2, right? At the moment so far. And I asked to define your tempo, and you define tempo as?
So I define tempo as 85% of threshold, but for short course races. So I want to make a clarification. Tempo has 2 roles, right? So if you do true tempo training, which is between zone 2 and zone 4, right, which is threshold, you do it, it's called the poor man's lactate threshold. it's driving your lactate threshold up from below. So it's a safe way to go about that. But now when I'm working with an athlete like Ben Canute, Ben does his tempo work. He does it fractionalized to start with, right? And he's just set the North American record for the Ironman distance in Roth, all right? And he runs at his expected race power. Okay, so which is fine. You could be using heart rate as well because they race in very hot conditions. Heart rates can be all over the place. So we use power with Ben, all right? So now it has a neuromuscular component. So his tempo is actually his race pace that he's training at. So he's training himself physiologically and he's training himself neurologically to run at that intensity, which is different to an athlete that's doing tempo to help raise their threshold.
Okay, so in Ben's case, elite, extremely elite, at the tip of the spear, and I think he ran, am I correct, 236, 240? What was the split?
Yeah.
237,
237.
right. I saw that. I was wildly impressed. So his training is at his marathon, Ironman marathon pace. His tempo, as I'm understanding it, is his marathon Ironman pace, 237. So when you ask him to do tempo efforts, that breaks down to approximately, what is that, Jim? 5:55 mile pace, 6-minute mile pace.
There. But are you basing his effort on? You're obviously on power, but are you ever basing it on that pace, or only on power, and whatever the pace comes out to be based on that power is what it is? How do you prescribe the workout?
I use a term called best controlled effort. So whatever he gets on the day, we'll equate that back to the number, right? So I talk about BCE. So he'll do that same workout. Let's say he's doing 6 by 10 minutes at his Ironman pace. That will be at a lower power than what he's doing now, which is preparing for 70.3s. He'll be doing 45, 50 minutes of work. All right, but he'll now be doing it at a higher power because he's doing it at his half Ironman running pace.
So someone who doesn't use power, just Joe Jane, normal guy, do you base their workouts on heart rate, or do you give them paces, or does it vary?
Very good question, but I will answer it to fit in with the next 3 months of Jerry's question. This athlete that we're working with is never going to be able to go above zone 2 anyway off the bike in their first 70.3. So there would be no point in endangering their lower limb by doing tempo work on the run. All right. Now, then I would look at polarized running. So with this individual, I would have them do alactic work, sub 9-second strides at slightly faster than the pace we're going to expect them to run in the race, to expand their mechanical capacity, right? And the best way to describe that is if you're preparing a race car to race across the country, right? And the average speed that you want this race car to go at is 100 miles an hour, right? It's no good that the top end of this car is 105. It has to be somewhere in the region of 120, 125 miles an hour for it to be comfortable and efficient at 100 miles an hour. So you would do mechanical work faster, but you wouldn't do physiological work faster. And of course, in the background, you've got the bike doing all of that necessary work at tempo intensity anyway. So you don't need to do it on the run. It's just too high risk that first cycle.
Well, I don't think a lot of athletes realize, and you've said this a couple times, but just to hone in on it, how important that bike training is to building that run fitness and that muscular resiliency and that muscular strength that you use on the run.
I have a KISS principle that I use on the run for beginners. If whatever you get down to, you decide, okay, I can ride this 56 miles in my upcoming 70.3. I can ride it at 175 watts, right? That's what I've figured out. As a runner in the sport of triathlon, you've got to say to yourself, okay, when I get to the end of 56 miles, I've still got to be able to put out 175 watts for the next 2 hours, but I'll be running. That's the mindset that the bike is a partial effort, not a maximal effort. And so it's when people go into a race and they say, if I have the best 56 miler of my life on the bike, then this is the power I can put out. And then expect the run coach, the run training, the runner in you to be able to go produce a performance that's related to your run training. No way it's going to happen. That's why people miss the boat so completely, is that the bike ride is either partialized, or you training to an extent that you can go 205, 210 for 56 miles, but you're only going to ride at 175.
So you've sort of answered the question, I think, into our initial example of breaking the 9-month athlete that's now doing a half Ironman into three-month phases. So the third phase still with this beginner, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily they're a beginner to the sport of triathlon. You're still staying in that zone 1, zone 2 efforts.
Yeah, you'll be doing mechanically a little faster, but on very short efforts. You might be doing 100-meter strides and things like that.
I was just going to ask, are you introducing any track workouts to this athlete, or utilizing the track as a gauge for observation mechanics? How would you, if you do introduce the track? Do you, and how would you?
It's a sports psychology question more than a training question, right?
Correct.
A lot of athletes in that who are now 50 and over have a very negative recollection of what the track means. All right. And you don't need to take them to the track, right? If they do a large part of their training in a winter environment and so on, the track becomes dangerous from a physical perspective, especially if it's a busy track and they always have to go counterclockwise, right? Now you're jamming up their left hip, you messing around with their right ankle, you're running the risk of hurting that athlete, right? So I'm saying your favorite shady spot in the park, a piece of asphalt that's nice and smooth and quiet, preferably 1 or 2 degrees down one way, 1 or 2 degrees up the other way, and you'll be using that for your pickups and your strides and that kind of stuff.
Are there specific drills or exercises that you prescribe for this type of athlete, our example athlete going through this first half Ironman?
Yeah. Very, as a generalized term, doing a very basic program, not even to the extent that we have in our run form program, but just using some bands and stuff like that, just strengthening the hips, strengthening the groin, strengthening the knee extensors, strengthening the arch, strengthening the ankles, and loaded mobility, which is critical for this kind of athlete that's coming from a concentric background, right? No eccentric part of that athlete, no eccentric training in that athlete's life. Everything was concentric. Everything was shortening, right? Now you're putting him in an environment where everything is lengthening when he's running. He's flexing his knee, he's flexing his arch, he's flexing his ankle, he's flexing his hip, right? So very quickly moving to the lowest level of plyometrics, like micro bounds, right? Literally running on the forefoot, on the midfoot, keeping the heel off the ground, taking slightly longer steps, just getting used to spring loading the tendons in the lower limb, right? Hopping is too much. Mini bounds is fine. Rope jumping is superlative. Pogos, fantastic way to train. Just little straight up and down pogo jumps, and then little split pogos. Brilliant way to condition the beginner athlete. Activate them, condition those tendons, not put them in any kind of danger. They can do it on a basketball court, a sprung floor with their running shoes on, and that would be the strength and conditioning. But the loaded mobility becomes very important as well. The functional mobility.
Being mindful to the time that we have here, without going through any of the detail, how much do you change? Oh, it doesn't sound like you're going to change much, I think, now for the athlete that's going to do, or the participant that's going to do an Olympic distance race, given the parameters that we started with.
Yeah, just go back to the last 3 months of the 70.3 athlete. Those last 3 months are spent just slowly building a little bit more volume on top of what they've got, now starting to approach being capable of doing the distance. And then a lot of the work that they're doing is logistically aligned. How is this going to look and feel and taste and operate in the race, so that they start actually rehearsing with the workouts that they're doing in the last 3 months? Okay, that's all I wanted to say.
Define that as a percentage of the hours. Given I use 10, it makes it for an easy, what percentage, what number of hours?
That, if that's 2.5, 3 hours, it's built into that 2.5, 3 hours. But now they're visualizing, they're rehearsing, they're using the drinks and the gels and the helmet and the shoes and the suit that they're going to be using in the race. They're starting to specifically now turn themselves from an athlete into a warrior, right? Because that's the phase that they were going to go to, right? They went from being nothing to being an athlete because they're working on themselves, but now they're going to work on, you're actually competing on race day, against themselves. It's still going to be the warrior mentality. But then as a percentage of that, just realize that training is emotional training, that training is mental training, all right? And that training is race training. So all of those things contribute to confidence just based on the mindset that they have in that last 3 months of training.
Well, let's talk about shoes, since you just brought up the equipment and the shoes. How important is shoe selection for the individual athlete? Let's not talk about carbon shoes yet, but just individual shoes for weekly runs.
Yeah, incredibly important. But again, based on, if you want to go to a certain place, you have to know where you are. So looking at where they are at the moment, what do they wear on their feet athletically? Were they pickleball players? Were they pick up basketball players? What kind of shoes did they wear, right? So you don't want to be going, well, mostly I just have my office shoes. They have a 12% drop, right? I have a 12 millimeter heel in this shoe, and I've only got a 4 millimeter forefoot. So there's an 8 millimeter drop in the shoe. All right. And now I want to go to ultras or something like that with a 0 drop shoe, or want to go to a really low drop shoe like a Hoka or something like that, right? So gradually transition from the environment that already exists to that, right? That was the big thing with the barefoot thing, right? The research clearly said at the beginning, habitually non-shod individuals, that's how the research was done. Nobody who read the book was non-shod. Everybody wears shoes. You know what I'm saying? So to look at it from that perspective, comfort, safety, right? So, the whole thing about running shoe support, I learned this from Matt Bolzer from the Reno Running Company, multiple Xterra US champion, is you want to know how people function in shoes that are healthy for them. You don't really want to know how they function barefoot, because they're never going to function barefoot. All right. So shoe selection, go the way Ben O'Nig goes, is what feels really nice for them, but it must feel really nice for them for long periods of time. All right. And then width of toe box, depth of toe box, looking at their arch, the way their foot is designed, something that they can wear for that period of time, and that does not exacerbate their form anomalies and make them worse runners. That's what's important.
And what about the, now the prevalence of these carbon shoes, and do you find athletes are wearing them too much? Do you find they're not wearing them enough? What's your kind of take on what's going on in the carbon shoe market right now?
Well, down in your world, Jerry, there's a famous doctor. What is his name? Saxena, I think, or something like that. He has found a direct correlation between navicular stress fractures and super shoes. And super shoes are not for everybody. And there's a transition phase, a strengthening phase required with super shoes. And Joubert has just done some research down in Texas that shows that a large, well, probably 20, 30%, and it was a tiny study, right? 20 to 30% of slower runners actually perform worse in a super shoe. All right. And that there's a less of an improvement. So if you have a ground contact time of, say, 350, 400 milliseconds, super shoe is not going to help you. It's actually going to hurt you. It's going to make you more sticky, right? Because you're not flexing that shoe. You're not getting it off the ground quick enough. So an 11-minute miler or a 12-minute miler might find they get a 2% advantage and not a 4% advantage from a super shoe if they are getting an advantage. So it really is suck it and see kind of thing, because my elites are all the same, right? They like certain super shoes and they despise other super shoes. Yet the studies show that they're quite similar in terms of the performance gains you should get. So
Yep.
fit and consistency and the ability to wear something from a safety perspective should come first with footwear.
So a little quickness into elite there, since you mentioned it, and we've sort of stayed away from that, but you do coach Gwen Jorgensen, I believe, or you assist her. She's making her
coach Gwen. Yeah, as a runner, I was part of her team when she was a triathlete, and then I was part of her team now with a comeback to triathlon.
So what does that comeback look like? What are your thoughts on, I mean, she left triathlon, went into the running world, spent whatever number of years there, 6 or 7 years. Now she's back to triathlon. What are her prospects from the perspective of the sport has really moved along pretty quickly in those 7 years? Yes, she ran, but she was running marathon races. I guess that's what her training was for, the 10K through the marathon, right?
Yeah, actually what happened, that the marathon was a very short-lived period of time. And she was dealing with some injuries that she already had in the triathlon years, but she ran very little as a triathlete. Maybe 19, 20 miles a week was her staple as a triathlete. So she very quickly actually qualified for the Olympics in the 5K, obviously didn't make it in the top 3 in the US Championships. So she ran a 15:09 5K, which is around about the time that Chelsea Sodaro ran as a professional runner as well. So she actually got a whole lot better. She was only about a 15:35 runner when she left triathlon, went to a 15:09, and she actually only ran one marathon, and she was desperately ill at that time. So in the end, she was going for 5,000 and 10,000. That's all she could do. Now that she's back in triathlon, she's swimming about as well as ever. She's actually better on the bike. And she just got a last-minute invite to Hamburg this weekend for the super sprint final mixed relay with, I think, 3 races. If you don't make it, there's a first round, then there's a repechage, and then there's a final. And so we'll see how she goes. She's going extremely well. The mindset is there. She's much more mellow now because she's the mother of 2, right? And she's always torn between being away from the kids for long periods of time. She had some bad breaks, right? Her showing in Mexico recently in the heat was very eye-opening for her to be able to run as fast as she did there, coming second. But I think that if she runs out of time, she's not going to make it. But if she has enough time to get the points to get into the races, she's got a very good chance of making the team again. From a sheer physical standpoint.
Saying she was meant to be a triathlete and not just a runner. That was her calling.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure we have a few questions.
Because it wasn't as complicated, right? And it wasn't as busy, and it didn't require as much travel. And she wanted to be a mom, right? Pretty much like Katie as well. And so it wasn't a question of that she wanted to go to running because she thought she would be a better runner. She wanted to go to running because it was simpler and it took less time.
Yep, no, that's definitely for sure, but it's not made for it. It's a lot of corrosion on the body, and I like the aspect of triathlon that just spreads it all out. So we have a few questions coming out of Facebook. We're gonna do our workout of the episode quickly. We're gonna fit that in, and then Emily, you got a couple questions on Facebook coming in, right? So if anybody has questions for Bobby, let's go to the workout of the episode real quick. Jerry, you want to go over that? It's coaching.tower26.com. Let me bring it up for everybody to peruse along with, and you find it. There we go. All right. So we will coaching.tower26.com. We're going to open up this workout so you guys can see the details. Jerry, you coached this one last week. What do you got for us this week?
Which is okay. So as usual, remember this workout these are designed, or what's presented here for level 1 athletes. How do we define that? Those are some of the elites Bobby was talking about. And then this gets scaled at 80%, 66 2/3%, almost down to 50%, depending on your level, your ability. So in this, let's remove through the warm-up. Let's just get right to the main set. We went through, Emily probably coached this one, because I haven't coached this one yet, but wrote this workout way back when. So we did approximately a 10-minute swim. It's an 800 at the level 1, and that would be scaled down to 700, 600, or 500 all the way down. for the beginning person, down to probably a 400 for them, something that takes you about 10 minutes to do. And we did this where we were sighting every fourth 50, right? Or the 800, the entire 800 had sighting in it, but every fourth 50 was fast. So you went 150 at moderate effort, and then we went a 50 fast. Is that correct, Jim? Did I
Yes, correct.
say that
Exactly.
correctly?
You got it.
Okay.
Yep.
We on the sighting portion, on the fast portion, we were sighting 2 times per 25. So when you got to that 50, every fourth 50, you had to have in 4 sights, 2 times per 25. If you're in a long course pool, it would be 4 sights for a 50-meter pool, 25-yard, 25-meter pool, 2 sights on the way down, 2 sights on the way back. And then we had about a 1-minute break, and then we went into half the distance. So the elite athletes would be going a 400, then a 300, and maybe up down to 200 for sort of your 2-minute per 100, 2:15 per 100 swimmers. And again, this time we did every fourth 25 fast. So think of this as the first 75 being held back in effort, and then every half Ironman effort in this case, and then the every fourth 25 pick up in speed. And again, with higher sighting or more sighting in that fourth 25. And we took a minute break after that, and we did that 2 rounds through. So this had a bit of pickup speed in it, okay, on those spike efforts, every fourth 25, every fourth 50, or in this case, every fourth 25 on the shorter one, 2 cycles through. So a big, bulky endurance portion. And then we hit a second portion to the main set where we went 12 100s, and that would, again, be scaled to 10, 9, 8, 7 100s. Or for some, it would be 75s. An example, somebody that's swimming about a minute 45 for a 100, they would go, a minute 40, minute 30 to a minute 40 for 100, they would go 75s. They go 12 75s. Somebody that's swimming 2 minutes per 100, they would go 8 to 10 75s. But the elite athletes are going 12 100s. What we really want is the distance, the duration, to take about the same amount of time for an athlete. So they're either going to swim 100s or 75s. Some may actually have to swim 50s if they're really slow. But we did these at an upper aerobic effort, 85%, and took very short rest in these, 10 seconds only. And what we're looking for is sustainable effort at your race pace, sustainable effort. So in Bobby's terms earlier, this would be Ben Canute doing his marathon effort in 10-minute spurts, however you describe it, 4 10-minute marathon efforts, how Bobby explained it earlier. So this was your 12 100s. So here's something that's taking about 15 minutes to execute at that 85% output.
Well, as you guys see, we are in the race ready phase, and we're implementing all those different tactics that you guys will be using on race day. So go to coaching.tower26.com, join up now, and follow the details of the workout. Like I said, we will open this one up so you guys can see all the fun details that we include in every single workout. So coaching.tower26.com. All right, Emily, we got some questions coming in for Bobby on Facebook. You want to rattle off who gave the question and what it is?
Yeah, Arlene asked, what running surfaces would you recommend?
Great question.
Yeah, great question, Arlene. So again, we know that treadmills are generally speaking, a higher quality treadmill has a really nice soft surface. The problem with treadmills is twofold, right? The band is turning and you just have to keep up so it doesn't expose your running form errors. So I wouldn't overdo things. If you live in an environment where you can get outside, run outside as much as you can. Concrete is roughly 5 times harder in the winter than asphalt is. So you probably want to go more towards asphalt. Also remember on the treadmill to just lift it up by about a 0.5% to 1% so that it mimics the imperfections of what you're going to find out on the road. If you are going to run on softer surfaces, realize that evenness is important, right? If they're too uneven and you can turn your ankle, that's a problem. But the beauty of uneven surfaces is they make sure that every footstep that you take is slightly different to the previous one, and that's the main cause of running injuries, right, is overuse. So the more pristine the surface is, the more likely you are to do similar steps. So uneven surfaces are good. With the one thing with uneven surfaces, they can be quite hard on softer surfaces. They can be quite hard on your arch and on your Achilles tendon. Your foot is actually more rigid on a softer surface than it is on a firm surface. So I would do the quality workouts with my athletes. We were talking about tempo, threshold kind of workouts. I'll do either on the asphalt, or if it's LT and VO2, I'll even do that on a track, which is a slightly more sprung surface. Stay away from the concrete. And then if you are going to use these softer informal surfaces, make sure it's pretty pristine, nice and smooth, and not too uneven.
Okay,
Great.
good answers. And then another question came in. Is there any rule of thumb in terms of long workouts, say for an Ironman? What would be your longest that you would recommend? And I know that's like a broad question, right? Because it depends based on the level of the athlete and what their history is, but try to get as general as you can.
That is absolutely right. I like time-based for a start because of the conundrum, right? The poorer the athlete, the longer the amount of time they're going to spend on the race course, right? Which would imply they need to run longer, but they are not able to run longer, right? So I generally think that as a rule of thumb, I wouldn't run more than 90 minutes at a time. It's just so much safer to do that, right? I'd rather fractionalize runs. And for example, if you're going to run 90 minutes continuously, you might as well go and spend 2 hours out there and break it up and go 9-1. You're going to recover from that quicker and have less danger of being injured. But I would say, for an Ironman, only before Roth did we start talking for the first time ever with Ben about numbers. And that was a couple of 18 milers and a couple of 20 milers. We never went 21, 22 miles. And even with my marathon runners, I seldom go that kind of distance, right? It's an accumulation thing. So I would probably say 90 minutes is a good bet for your longest run.
Right. And an 18 to 20 mile run for Ben Canute, it's not time-wise, it's still probably under 2 hours.
Exactly. It's gonna take the average person to go and run a 20 miler, right? It's gonna take them 3 hours, which is too much.
Right.
Okay.
All right, I got a question. So pound for pound, who's the fastest runner in the world?
Pound for pound.
Pound for pound.
Oh, look who he's pointing at, Bobby.
Right.
Look who he's pointing at. Yeah.
I don't know. I'd say Peter Mayer was the fastest runners in the world, pound for pound. He qualified for the World Championships in the marathon at 190, 195 pounds.
Yeah, I'm coming for him. I'm putting on weight just so I can go get him.
Okay, good.
All right, Jerry, any last thoughts from you before we let Bobby
Anything
go?
else, Emily? Nothing else?
Someone asked something about a floating swim triangle that you
Jason
developed.
Smith want to know about your the floating swim triangle that you developed. Is there any word on the prevalence of the floating swim triangle that you tried to introduce in Santa Barbara in 1985? No, he doesn't remember.
No,
he doesn't remember.
Okay.
Right.
So Bobby, I want to have you back because I want to deep dive into tempo effort, threshold. I heard from you best controlled effort. I heard LT. I heard VO2 max. We have all these terms out there in running and in triathlon training and swimming and in biking. I want to help our audience, our listeners, athletes really understand what these terms mean, because I think they're somehow at times loosely defined, at other times very specifically defined the way you did. And the better we can educate our athletes, I think the better they can read prescriptions and workouts and deliver what they're asked to be delivered.
All right, let's throw this in then, that they go out there and do their homework before the next time I'm on. Look at what is the difference between LT1 and LT2. What is the difference between OBLA, onset of blood lactate, and MLSS, mean lactate steady state? Because those are the current buzzwords, right? So, and some of them have been around for a while, but with the advent of blood lactate testing and the Norwegians, that has become
right
a fashion. Yeah,
exactly. And we're going to throw a monkey wrench into all of this in one of our next podcasts when we have Gennadius on, because we're going to talk about these zones, and that is going to create wild interest based on what he's going to have to say. So
fame might become notoriety.
right.
All
Well,
right, Bobby, it's
super-
been a pleasure having you on. BobbyMcGee.com. You guys have more information. He's got an Instagram page, and yeah, I mean, just my head's exploding with so much intel here. So thank you for all the knowledge, and really, really informative. We're getting a lot of good feedback. So thank you for everything.
Oh, you're welcome, guys. I had a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Exactly. So Jerry, anything else from you?
You know, Bobby's one of these guys that you can just ask one or two open-ended questions and sit back and listen forever. And it's so easy. He's so very good at what he does and how he describes things that I wish we had we need a 6-hour marathon with Bobby McGee to just sort of download that brain the best we could and benefit everybody out there.
Exactly.
We'll have to do walking podcasts in that case. We can't sit for that long.
That's right.
And he starts charging after an hour. So
Yes.
Emily, anything else from you? Anything else on your mind?
No, this is great. I first saw Bobby at a USAT level 1 coaching certification, and he was my favorite presenter. So it was nice
Thank you.
it's all
Appreciate
full circle.
Just so you know, she says that about every guest we have. So, all right, Bobby, it's been a pleasure. For Bobby McGee, Emily Cox, Jerry Rodriguez, Jim Linsky, the Tower 26B Race Radio Podcast. Thanks for listening, guys.